Welcome to USA Stories channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Here I am, Ava, sitting in the dim light of our living room, the clock ticking away the seconds of what used to be a predictable life. My hands, usually steady from years of handling delicate lenses, now tremble slightly as I clutch a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth doing little to soothe the chill that's settled in my bones. I've always been meticulous, a trait that served me well in my profession as an optometrist. My patients often commented on how my precision in fitting their glasses was almost surgical, but precision, I've learned, doesn't shield one from the chaos that life can throw your way. Benjamin, my husband, is out in the garage, as he often is on a Saturday night. His passion for vintage cars is something I've always admired, a hobby that brought a touch of nostalgia and character into our otherwise modern life. The sound of tools clicking and the occasional curse when something doesn't go as planned used to be comforting, a reminder of his dedication. But tonight, those sounds echo differently, like a prelude to something ominous. Shadow, our German shepherd, lies at my feet, his head resting on my slippers. His eyes, usually alert and full of life, now reflect a quiet concern, as if he too senses the shift in our world. He's been with us since he was a pup, a constant in our lives, his loyalty unwavering, but even his presence can't dispel the growing unease. Our home, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, has always been our sanctuary. The walls, painted in soothing hues of blue and green, once held the laughter of friends and family, the aroma of homemade meals and the warmth of shared moments. Now, those same walls seem to close and the colors muted, as if they too are bracing for what's to come. It all started so innocently, or so I thought, a routine checkup at work, a patient who seemed just like any other. But there was something about him, a look in his eyes that didn't quite match his polite demeanor. I remember feeling a slight unease, dismissing it as fatigue from a long day. How wrong I was. The days that followed were, like any other, filled with the usual rhythms of our life. Benjamin and I would wake up, share a quick breakfast, and then part ways for our respective jobs. Evenings were spent discussing our day, watching the news, or simply enjoying each other's company in silence. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something was brewing, a storm I never saw coming. I can't pinpoint the exact moment when the first crack appeared in our perfect harmony. Was it the subtle change in Benjamin's behavior, the way he seemed more distracted, his laughter less frequent? Or was it the strange calls I started receiving, the hang-ups that left a lingering sense of dread as I sit here, reflecting on the events that unfolded? I'm haunted by the what-ifs. What if I had paid more attention to that patient? What if I had confronted Benjamin about his growing distance? What if I had answered those calls instead of letting them go to voicemail? The storm that's brewing isn't just a metaphor. It's real, and it's threatening to tear apart everything we've built. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now feels like a fragile illusion ready to shatter at the slightest touch. What could possibly disrupt the perfect harmony of our lives? Keep listening to find out. It was a typical Thursday, the kind where the week feels like it's dragging its feet into the weekend. Benjamin was out of town for a tech conference, leaving me and Shadow to our own devices. The house felt unusually quiet without Benjamin's constant tinkering or the sound of his laughter. To shake off the loneliness, I decided to take Shadow for a walk, which led us to the old guest house at the back of our property. It had been years since anyone used it, and it was more of a storage space, now filled with old furniture and memories. As we explored, I found myself reminiscing about the times Benjamin and I had spent there planning our future. The nostalgia was comforting, yet it also highlighted the distance that had grown between us over time. The guest house door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. Dust Montez danced in the shafts of light that pierced through the gaps in the curtains. Shadow sniffed around, his tail wagging, seemingly oblivious to the weight of the past that hung in the air. I walked over to an old wooden table where Benjamin and I once sat sketching out our dreams. There were blueprints of a house we never built, travel itineraries we never followed, and a list of baby names we never used. Each item was a reminder of what could have been, of the life we envisioned, but somehow lost along the way. Sitting down on the dusty chair, I traced my fingers over the faded ink of our plans. The silence was overwhelming, only broken by the occasional rustle of Shadow moving about. It was here, in this quiet solitude, that I realized how much had changed. Benjamin's career had taken off. demanding more of his time. His passion for vintage cars had turned into an obsession, and our conversations had dwindled to mere exchanges of daily updates. The guest house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, now felt like a mausoleum of our past. I stood up, my heart heavy, and walked towards a window, pulling back the curtain. The light was dim, casting long shadows across the room. It was then I noticed something odd, a small, unfamiliar box tucked away under the table. Curiosity piqued. I retrieved the box. It was plain, made of wood, with no markings or labels. As I opened it, a chill ran down my spine. Inside was a collection of photographs, not of us, but of me, candid shots taken at various times and places. I frequented my breath, caught in my throat, who had been watching me. The photos were recent, some from just weeks ago. There was one from the clinic, another from our backyard, and even one where I was walking shadow. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Someone had been following me, documenting my life without my knowledge. My mind raced back to the patient with the unsettling gaze. The strange calls, Benjamin's distracted demeanor. Could these be connected? I felt a surge of fear, the kind that grips your heart and doesn't let go. I closed the box, my hands shaking. Shadow, sensing my distress, came over, nuzzling his head against my leg. I needed answers. But where to start? Benjamin was away, and confronting him over the phone about something this bizarre felt wrong. I decided to keep the box hidden to wait for Benjamin's return. Maybe he could shed light on this mystery. But as I left the guest house, locking the door behind me, the weight of the unknown bore down on me. The once comforting solitude of our home now felt like a cage with unseen eyes watching from the shadows. The walk back to the main house was tense. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant sound seemed amplified. Shadow stayed close, his protective instincts on high alert. As we entered the house, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and set the alarm. Something I rarely did during the day. The evening stretched on. Each tick of the clock is a reminder of the secrets that now lay between Benjamin and me. I couldn't shake the feeling that our life, once so predictable, was now a puzzle, with pieces missing. I sat down with another cup of tea, this time not for comfort, but to study my nerves. The photographs haunted me, each one a silent accusation, a question mark in my mind. What was happening, who was behind this, and why? As the night deepened, I knew sleep would be elusive. The storm that was brewing wasn't just outside, it was within our home, within our marriage, within me. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now felt like a fragile illusion ready to shatter at the slightest touch. And what happened next in that guest house would change everything. Stay tuned. In the dim light of the guest house, I sat on an old couch, lost in thought, with Shadow lying at my feet. The solitude was overwhelming, and in a moment of weakness I reached out for comfort, not from Benjamin, but from Shadow. What started as a simple petting session escalated into something I never anticipated. In my loneliness, I crossed a line that I didn't even know existed. The act was over as quickly as it began, leaving me in a state of shock and self-loathing. I had committed an act of infidelity, not with another person, but with our beautiful dog. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and the guilt was suffocating. How could I face Benjamin after this? The answer might surprise you. The next morning I woke up with a heavy heart, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The sun was filtering through the curtains, casting a soft, almost mocking glow over the room. I couldn't bear to look at Shadow, who lay at the foot of the bed, his tail thumping lightly against the floor. Oblivious to the turmoil inside me, I made my way to the kitchen, each step feeling like I was walking through quicksand. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I brewed coffee, hoping the routine would bring some semblance of normalcy back into my life. But as I sipped the hot liquid, my mind replayed the events of the previous night, each memory a sharp sting of regret. I knew I had to talk to Benjamin, but how? How do you tell your husband that in a moment of vulnerability, you sought solace in the most inappropriate way? The thought of his reaction, the potential disgust or confusion, made my stomach churn as I stood there, lost in my thoughts. The phone rang, slicing through the silence. It was Benjamin. My heart raced. My hands shook as I picked up the call. "Hey, how are things at home?" Benjamin's voice was cheerful, unaware of the storm brewing within me. Everything's fine. I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. How's the conference? It's going well. I might be back a day early. Actually thought I'd surprise you as you please. The irony wasn't lost on me here. I was planning how to confess a betrayal, and he was planning a surprise return. That sounds great, I replied, my voice hollow. I'll see you soon then. After hanging up, I felt the walls closing in the house. Once our sanctuary now felt like a prison of my own making. I needed to clear my head to find some way to deal with this guilt. Before Benjamin returned, I decided to go for a drive to escape the confines of her home. Shadow followed me to the car, his eyes full of that unwavering loyalty that now felt like a cruel reminder of my betrayal. I couldn't leave him behind, not after what I'd done. Driving aimlessly, I found myself at the park where Benjamin and I used to walk. Shadow. The place was filled with memories of happier times of laughter and shared dreams. Sitting on a bench, I watched families, couples, and their pets, all seemingly in harmony, a stark contrast to the discord within me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos of Benjamin and me of our life together. Each picture was a reminder of what I stood to lose. The guilt was overwhelming, a relentless tide that threatened to drown me. I needed advice, someone to talk to, but who my friends they'd never understand. A therapist, perhaps, but the thought of verbalizing my shame to a stranger was daunting. As the day wore on, I returned home, the weight of my secret heavier than ever. I prepared dinner, going through the motions, trying to act normal for when Benjamin returned. But every clink of cutlery, every sizzle from the pan was a reminder of the normalcy I'd shattered. When Benjamin walked through the door, his face lit up with a smile. I felt a pang of guilt, so sharp it was physical. He hugged me, his warmth a stark contrast to the cold dread inside me. I've missed you, he said, kissing my forehead. I've missed you too. I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We sat down to eat, and I tried to engage in small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. Benjamin noticed my distraction, his brow furrowing in concern. Is everything okay? Ava, you seem off. I took a deep breath, the moment of truth looming. Benjamin, there's something I need to tell you. Something happened while you were away. His expression shifted from concern to confusion. What is it? I hesitated, the word stuck in my throat. How could I explain this without breaking us? I did something I deeply regret. It was a moment of weakness, and I'm so sorry. Benjamin's face was a mask of confusion. What are you talking about? Ava! I couldn't meet his eyes, my gaze fixed on the table. I was lonely, and I made a terrible mistake with Shadow. The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin's fork clattered against his plate. What do you mean with Shadow? I explained, my voice, barely a whisper, detailing the loneliness, the moment of weakness, and the act that followed. Benjamin's reaction was not what I expected. There was no immediate anger, no shouting. Instead, he looked at me with a mix of sadness and understanding. Ava, I'm not sure what to say. I know things have been tough with my work and everything. I've been distant, and I'm sorry for that. His response, his calm, his attempt to understand, only deepened my guilt. I'm so sorry, Benjamin. I didn't know how else to cope. We'll get through this, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. But we need to talk, really talk about where we are, about us. That night we talked until the early hours. It wasn't just about my mistake, but about our life, our marriage, and the distance that had grown between us. Benjamin's understanding, his willingness to work through this, was a lifeline in the storm of my guilt. But as we lay in bed, the darkness around us, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road to forgiveness, to healing, would be long and fraught with challenges. Yet in Benjamin's arms, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild what I had nearly destroyed. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now felt like a fragile illusion. But perhaps with time and effort we could mend it. And as I drifted into a troubled sleep, I realized that facing Benjamin after my betrayal was not the end, but a painful, necessary beginning. Days turned into a blur as I tried to act normal around Benjamin. Every look from him felt like an accusation, every touch a reminder of my betrayal. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, haunted by what I had done. Shadow, sensing my distress, became more cling, which only deepened my guilt. I started avoiding the guest house, but the memory of that day was inescapable. The solitude of our home, once comforting, now felt like a cage. I contemplated confessing to Benjamin, but the thought of losing him was unbearable. My life was spiraling, and I was at a loss on how to regain control. The days stretched on, each one more torturous than the last. I found myself watching Benjamin, looking for signs that he knew that he suspected, but he was as loving as ever, which somehow made the guilt even worse. How could I tell him? How could I not? One evening as we sat in the living room, the silence between us was thick with unspoken words. Benjamin was reading, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose while I pretended to watch TV, my mind a whirlwind of guilt and fear. Benjamin, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. There's something I need to tell you. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a warmth that made my heart ache. What is it? Ava, I took a deep breath, the words heavy on my tongue. I did something while you were away, something I deeply regret. His expression shifted, concern etching lines into his forehead. What happened? The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls pressing in. I was lonely and I made a mistake with Shadow. The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin's book fell to the floor with a soft thud. His face was a mask of confusion, then pain with Shadow. His voice was a mix of disbelief and hurt. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. I was in the guest house, feeling so alone, and I crossed a line. I'm so sorry, Benjamin. He stood up, pacing the room, his hands running through his hair. I don't know what to say. Ava, this is unexpected. Tears streamed down my face, the weight of my confession crushing me. I know, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to cope with the loneliness, with the feeling that we were drifting apart. Benjamin stopped pacing, turning to face me. His eyes were searching, trying to understand. We've been distant. I know I've been so caught up in work and my hobbies. I've neglected our connection. But this, Ava, this is something I never imagined. I understand if you can't forgive me. I whispered, my voice breaking. I just couldn't keep this secret any longer. It was eating me alive. He sat back down, his face softening slightly. Ava, I'm not saying it's okay, because it's not, but I love you. We've built a life together and I want to understand to work through this, but it's going to take time. The relief was palpable, yet it was tinged with the understanding that our path forward would be fraught with challenges. I'll do whatever it takes. Benjamin, therapy, counseling, anything to make this right. He nodded, his gaze distant. We'll start there. We need help, both of us. That night we didn't sleep much. We really talked about everything. Our fears, our dreams, the distance that had grown between us. It was raw, painful, but necessary. We agreed to seek professional help to try and rebuild what I had nearly destroyed as the days passed. The atmosphere in our home was tense but hopeful. Benjamin was supportive, yet there was a new layer of complexity in our interactions. Every touch, every conversation was laden with the weight of my confession. Shadow, ever loyal, seemed to sense the shift, staying close but not too close, as if he too understood the gravity of what had happened. I began to see a therapist, someone helped me navigate through my guilt and the underlying issues that led to my actions. Benjamin joined me for some sessions, and together we started to peel back the layers of our relationship, examining the cracks that had formed. The process was slow, painful, and often filled with setbacks. There were days when the progress seemed non-existent, where the air was thick with unresolved tension. But there were also moments of breakthrough where we connected in ways we hadn't in years. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Benjamin took my hand as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Ava, I want you to know I'm here. We're in this together. It's not just about forgiving you. It's about us finding our way back to each other. His words, his touch, they were a balm to my soul. Thank you, Benjamin. I love you and I'm committed to making this work. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our yard, I felt a cautious optimism. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now felt like a fragile illusion. But with each passing day, with each effort we made, it seemed less like an illusion and more like a possibility. Would I confess, or would the secret consume me? The climax is just around the corner, but for now we were taking steps, small and tentative, towards healing, towards forgiveness, towards a new beginning. The tension reached its peak one evening when Benjamin, noticing my unusual behavior, confronted me. His concern was palpable, and in that moment I broke the words, tumbled out, a confession of my unthinkable act. Benjamin's face went from concern to confusion to horror. The silence that followed was deafening. He left the room and I heard the front door slam. I sat there alone with Shadow, who looked at me with those innocent eyes, unaware of the storm he had unwittingly been part of. Days had passed since that night, and the air in our home was thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Benjamin had returned, but the warmth that once filled our house was replaced by a chilling distance. Every interaction was measured, every conversation cautious. I found myself in the kitchen preparing dinner, the routine of chopping vegetables, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. The sound of a knife hitting the cutting board was the only noise in the otherwise silent house. Shadow lay in the corner, his gaze occasionally flicking up to me as if he could sense the tension. Benjamin walked in, his footsteps heavy. He paused at the doorway, watching me for a moment before speaking. "Ava, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I turned, the knife still in my hand, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I know," I replied, setting the knife down with a clatter. "I've been waiting for you to say something." He sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped together, looking down at them as if they held answers. "I've been trying to process everything. It's not easy. Ava, what you did, it's not something I ever thought we'd face." I moved to sit across from him, the table between us, feeling like a vast chasm. "I understand, Benjamin. I've been trying to understand it myself. I'm so sorry for everything." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a mix of pain and confusion. "I know you are, but it's not just about the apology. It's about trust, about our future. How do we move forward from this?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. I reached across the table, my hand hesitating before touching his. "I want to rebuild that trust, Benjamin. I'm willing to do whatever it takes: therapy, time, patience. I know it won't be easy, but I want to try." Benjamin's hand didn't move away, but it didn't grasp mine either. "I've been thinking about that. Maybe we should see someone together, someone who can help us navigate through this." Relief washed over me, mixed with a deep sense of responsibility. "Yes, I agree, we need guidance, someone to help us find our way back to each other." He nodded, his gaze drifting to Shadow, who had now come to sit beside him, his head resting on Benjamin's knee. "And what about him?" Benjamin asked, his voice softer. Now I looked at Shadow, feeling a pang of guilt. "He's innocent in all this. He doesn't understand what happened, but I think he feels the change in our home." Benjamin's hand finally moved, gently stroking Shadow's head. "We'll have to figure out how to move forward with him too. He's part of our family." The conversation that followed was one of the hardest we'd ever had. We talked about boundaries, about the need for space and time, about the possibility of forgiveness. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start, a painful, necessary beginning to a journey neither of us had anticipated. As night fell, we sat on the porch, the cool air balm to the heat of our discussion. The sky was a canvas of dark blues and purples, stars beginning to twinkle in the distance. Benjamin's arm found its way around my shoulders, a gesture so familiar yet now loaded with the weight of our new reality. "We'll get through this." He murmured more to himself than to me, but I felt the sincerity in his words. I leaned into him, the comfort of his presence, a stark reminder of what we were fighting for together. I whispered back the word, feeling like a promise, a fragile hope in the darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges we couldn't predict. But in that moment, with the night enveloping us, there was a glimmer of something that felt like hope, not the bright, clear hope of our past, but a tentative, cautious one born from the ashes of our mistakes. And as we sat there, the silence between us was no longer deafening, but filled with the quiet resolve to heal, to understand, and perhaps in time to forgive. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now felt like a fragile illusion. But with each passing moment, with each effort we made, it seemed less like an illusion and more like a possibility. In the days that followed, Benjamin and I barely spoke. The house, once filled with the warmth of our shared life, now felt like a mausoleum, echoing with the silence of our strained relationship. Each room held memories of laughter, of love, but now they seemed to mock the distance between us. Benjamin suggested therapy, not just for us as a couple, but for me individually. It was a suggestion wrapped in concern, a sign that he still cared despite everything we agreed to separate for a while. to give each other the space needed to heal. I moved into the guest house, the very place where my life had taken a drastic turn. It was my self-imposed exile, a space to confront my actions and their consequences. Shadow, our loyal German shepherd, stayed with Benjamin, which was for the best. His presence would have been a constant reminder of my betrayal. The therapy sessions were grueling, each one peeled back layers of my psyche, exposing the raw nerves of my loneliness, my guilt, and the complexities of my emotions. I learned about the depth of my isolation, how I had sought comfort in the wrong places, and the underlying issues that had driven me to such a desperate act. Benjamin and I started communicating again, but not as husband and wife, rather as three people trying to understand each other's pain. Our conversations were cautious, filled with tentative steps towards understanding. We talked about everything from our fears to our dreams, the distance that had grown between us, and the possibility of forgiveness. Our future was uncertain, but in the quiet solitude of the guest house, I found a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something new from the ashes of our past. The therapy sessions, though painful, were also a beacon of light, guiding us through the fog of our confusion and hurt. I spent many nights reflecting the silence of the guest house, amplifying my thoughts. I remembered the times Benjamin and I had spent here, planning our future full of hope and love. Now those memories were tinged with sorrow, but also with a resolve to make amends. The process of healing was slow, fraught with setbacks. There were days when the weight of my guilt seemed insurmountable, when the thought of Benjamin's pain was all I could see. But there were also moments of breakthrough where we connected in ways we hadn't in years, where the love we once shared flickered back to life, albeit in a different form. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Benjamin came over to the guest house. We sat on the small porch, the night air cool against our skin. He took my hand, his touch familiar yet now carrying the weight of our new reality. "Ava, I want you to know I'm here. We're in this together. It's not just about forgiving you. It's about us finding our way back to each other," he said, his voice steady, filled with a sincerity that touched my heart. "Thank you, Benjamin. I love you and I'm committed to making this work." I replied, feeling the truth of my words resonate within me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our yard, I felt a cautious optimism. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now felt like a fragile illusion. But with each passing day, with each effort we made, it seemed less like an illusion and more like a possibility. The journey was far from over. Each step forward was hard, one each conversation a bridge over troubled waters. But in that moment, with the night enveloping us, there was a glimmer of something that felt like hope, not the bright, clear hope of our past, but a tentative, cautious one born from the ashes of our mistakes. And as we sat there, the silence between us was no longer deafening, but filled with the quiet resolve to heal, to understand, and perhaps in time to forgive. The harmony of our lives, once so perfect, now felt like a fragile illusion. But with each passing moment, with each effort we made, it seemed less like an illusion and more like a possibility. Will Ava and Benjamin find their way back to each other? Only time will tell. Asterisk, asterisk, if you enjoyed this suspenseful story and want to hear more, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more thrilling content.